Mr.
David
Speaker.
Clark. I rise to speak to this bill, and Labor will support it to Select Committee. We recognise the importance of having legislation in this area. It is an area that, as previous speakers have mentioned, banks have already dabbled in this country. These bonds exist in New Zealand but lack a regulatory framework. One of the debates which no doubt will happen when this bill gets through to Select Committee, as I imagine it will, is the appropriate percentage that New Zealand sets for its regulatory framework. We've heard from experts questioned at the Select Committee that different rates exist around the world according to perceived needs. Canada, for example, has a 4% rate for covered bonds. And we can imagine the arguments that might be put in favour of having a low amount in our economy, and they might be to ensure that those other investors who participate in the sector are not put at the bottom of the heap at the expense of the big investors who rush in to take advantage of the covered bonds that put them at the front of the queue. And we will look forward very much to hearing in Select Committee from submitters who represent the unsecured interests that will be jilted down the queue as a result of this legislation proceeding, should it proceed from the Select Committee through the House. There have been $6 billion worth of bonds issued over 2 years without any regulatory oversight, and so that is why Labor recognises this as an area that clearly needs to be addressed. The bill has been through 2 consultation processes with broad acceptance of the proposed legislation by most banks and bondholders, and so we anticipate that the actual concept itself will most likely survive unless there are any issues raised that had not been raised in other jurisdictions or that specifically apply to New Zealand in the case of these bonds. Mr. Speaker, during the Select Committee process recently in relation to the Financial Stability Report, I had the opportunity to ask the Reserve Bank Governor some questions about this issue, and he related the fact that the 10% proposed in New Zealand, his offsider related that the proposal of having a 10% level is indeed very similar to that which Australia currently has at 8%. And so it seems a good starting point for a discussion. The question really in my mind should be, is that too high? Is that adequate? Or should it be brought down? Similar to the Canadian example that I cited earlier. And I asked the question in that Select Committee about the effect on unsecured creditors, those already who have invested in similar investments that may be affected by a subsequent issue of covered bonds. And those investors are the ones that we, certainly in the Labor Party, will be concerned about in the progression of this legislation, because we can be pretty confident that those institutional investors that are pushing for this covered bond market and the banks that supply them will make sure that their interests are looked after, and the Labor Party will want to make sure that those unsecured creditors further down the track are not disproportionately disadvantaged as a result of legislation that is designed to make sure the banking sector has desirable offerings. And the answer that I got was what one might expect from an expert in the field, and that the answer was that the basis for the limit is the fact that the more secured funding a bank does, then potentially that dilutes the interest of the unsecured creditors. It is a fact. And so the answer was, if you let banks to do what they wanted, they would have that in mind, and so they wouldn't want to have too much secured borrowing. But to be on the safe side, according to the Reserve Bank, they are recommending a 10% limit. As I said, Mr. Speaker, we support the basic proposal, and we look forward to hearing from submitters on the merits of the level and indeed if there are any snags that we haven't spotted, and that's why the Labour Party will be pleased to support this to Select Committee. Thank you.
Speaker.
Dr. Kennedy Graham.